Howdy folks, it's me, Josh. It's a well-known fact that European royal families are prone to interbreeding in order to strengthen their power by forming ties to other nations. But what's less known is the sheer extent to which this went, to the point that by the early 20th century, pretty much every European royal was related to pretty much every other European royal in one way or another. Let me show you what I mean. In Russia, Tsar Nicholas II's aunt was married to King Edward VII of England, who was the son of Queen Victoria and the father of King George V. Edward was second cousins with King Carlos of Portugal, who was also the grandson of King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy. Carlos's uncle was King of Romania, which was ruled by the same royal house as Germany. Edward VII's niece was married to Nicholas II, which I'm sure was awkward at family reunions, and Edward's sister was the wife of the late Kaiser Frederick of Germany and the mother of Wilhelm II. Wilhelm's sister was married to King Constantine I of Greece, making them brothers-in-law, and Constantine was cousins with every Scandinavian king, as well as with Nicholas II. So, George V was cousins with Wilhelm II and Nicholas II. These two were grandsons of Queen Victoria, this one was not, and though Wilhelm II and Nicholas II weren't first cousins, they were both second and third cousins due to both being descended from Tsar Paul of Russia and King Frederick Wilhelm III of Prussia. Whew. Okay. So, if that made no sense at all, good, it's not supposed to. But you see what I mean. Pretty much every single European royal was related to pretty much every other European royal in one way or another, which led to some pretty interesting dynamics at times. For instance, in England, if after the death of Queen Victoria, the throne was passed to her eldest child instead of her eldest son, the throne would have then been passed to her first daughter, who, after her death, would have then passed the English throne on to none other than Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany. But though this never came to pass, what if it did? What if, in an alternate timeline, Kaiser Wilhelm II became King of England? So, in order to understand what would happen, we first need to understand Wilhelm and the situation between Britain and Germany. As I said before, Wilhelm was the son of Princess Victoria of England, the eldest child of Queen Victoria, and eventual Kaiser Frederick III of Germany. Wilhelm was born with a withered arm, which would greatly affect his personality, as his insecurity over his deformity would make him brash and overcompetitive, wanting to prove his own personal power. Wilhelm would reject the liberalism of his parents and despise the British system as he went on to become a firm Prussian militarist. When Germany united in 1871, Britain generally supported the creation of the new state, seeing it as a powerful check against both France and Russia. But in 1888, Kaiser Wilhelm I died, being succeeded by his son, Frederick III, who himself died only 99 days later, being succeeded by Wilhelm, now crowned as Kaiser Wilhelm II. Upon his ascension, many in Britain actually admired Wilhelm II, which would definitely come as a surprise to us today given what they thought of him during World War I. Many in Britain viewed Wilhelm as energetic, charismatic, and as a strong leader, actually seeing him as an example for then Crown Prince Edward. But these feelings wouldn't last forever, as within the next decade, Wilhelm's ambitions would end up bringing Germany and Britain on a collision course. Wilhelm had big ideas for Germany, seeing the possibility of it not just becoming a great power, but a world superpower. And for Wilhelm, that meant self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency meant colonies, and colonies meant navy. Under the supervision of Admiral Tirpitz, Wilhelm began a huge buildup of the German navy, which started to worry Britain, as one of Germany's main goals was to surpass the British in naval might. So, this would start the first real strain on Anglo-German relations with the Anglo-German naval arms race. England, though, seeing the alliance structures building up across Europe, began to worry that if they didn't find some allies, they might be left vulnerable, which ultimately led Britain to move away from its traditional splendid isolation towards engaging in continental affairs. And despite some strains in the relations, some in Britain still saw Germany as a strong potential ally against France and Russia. Some attempts at an Anglo-German alliance were made throughout the 1890s, but they ended up falling through, with Britain instead moving closer with France, signing the Entente Cordiale in 1904. As a result, Germany and Britain would never end up mending their divides, and when the First World War broke out in 1914, Britain would join the war against Germany, ultimately seeing victory as Kaiser Wilhelm would end up being deposed from power. But what if that changed? What if, in an alternate timeline, Kaiser Wilhelm II ended up becoming King of England? There's a few ways we could do this, such as having Queen Victoria never have any sons, have all the male heirs die before her, or change the succession laws from a male primogeniture system to an absolute primogeniture system, meaning the throne is passed to the eldest child, regardless of whether it's a son or daughter, instead of to the eldest son. However, as I showed in the confusion earlier, all of these would have unforeseen consequences that could change the scenario in ways we couldn't possibly predict. So, for simplicity's sake, I'm gonna go with the easiest method of having England, for whatever reason, change its succession laws just prior to Queen Victoria's death so that we don't have to change too much before it even happens. So, after Victoria's death, she would then be succeeded by her daughter, who would be crowned as Queen Victoria II before dying 7 months later. And then, the English throne would be passed to her eldest son, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who would then be crowned as King William V of the United Kingdom. The populace in Britain would have mixed reactions to Wilhelm becoming king, with some being excited about the young king and how this Anglo-German union posed a solution to Britain's lack of alliances in Europe. However, others, noting Wilhelm's seemingly sporadic and authoritarian behavior, as well as his vehement opposition to the British system, would become worried that he might attempt to take absolute control and essentially turn Britain into a German colony. And these people's worries would eventually come true. Wilhelm would very likely see his kingly position as an opportunity to use Britain to bolster Germany's own position in the world, and would very likely attempt to dismantle the liberal parliamentary system. Since Britain technically doesn't have a written constitution, instead going off of tradition, most of the limitations on the king's powers are really just strong suggestions based on convention and precedent. And since I doubt Wilhelm would have any respect for British liberal conventions, he would very likely just ignore them and attempt to center power around himself. However, this definitely would not come without its consequences. The liberal British population would vehemently oppose Wilhelm's attempts at deliberalizing the country and push for Wilhelm's abdication and the passage of a written constitution. When it comes to how opposition to Wilhelm breaks down, I could see the liberals in Britain having the strongest opposition to him, with the conservatives being split, some being against Wilhelm and some being more moderate, wanting to find a compromise in order to keep from causing too much internal tension. Wilhelm, though, wouldn't care for compromise and wouldn't voluntarily restrict his own power unless absolutely necessary. Due to the nature of Wilhelm's ascension to the British throne, being through a change in the succession laws, it's very likely that the opposition to Wilhelm would begin to coalesce behind a rival claimant, most notably Edward VII, who himself had strained relations with Wilhelm in our timeline and would likely support his nephew's removal. And so, tensions would continue to boil over not only among the English populace, but within the English court as well, as many of Wilhelm's rivals in the royal family might begin plotting for his removal. However, with some radicals, simply changing the monarch wouldn't be enough, as they begin wanting the abolition of the monarchy outright. France, meanwhile, without the signing of the Entente Cordiale with England, would be left with Russia as its only ally. And after its humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, the French would begin to grow desperate, knowing they wouldn't stand a chance against Germany. So, seeing the backlash against Wilhelm's rule in England, France would give support to anti-Wilhelm movements, likely establishing relations with Edward VII and attempting to prop him up as their chosen monarch. As pushes against Wilhelm's rule in Britain continue to grow, I could see two things happen. Number one is that, despite pushes for his abdication, Wilhelm doesn't back down, holding on to the British throne, leading to a revolt breaking out against his rule. And number two is that, if things get bad enough, Wilhelm decides it would be best to abdicate in order to avoid a revolt, similarly to what he tried to do at the end of the First World War, in which he attempted to abdicate the title of German Emperor but remain as King of Prussia, abdicating the British throne while retaining the German one, though pushing for concessions to Germany in exchange. However, since number two doesn't really end up changing all that much from our own timeline, and also because it isn't as fun, I'm going to explore the first one. Even if Wilhelm attempts to negotiate for abdication, it's still possible that the English people would reject his terms and continue pushing back. So, as time goes on and Wilhelm continues to dismantle the parliamentary system and center power in England around himself, and with France instigating tensions, a revolt would eventually break out, attempting to restore the liberal order in England and place Edward VII, or, if the revolt happens later, George V on the throne, seeing general support from the British populace. However, despite general support, many moderates might still back the government, attempting to return to the status quo. Wilhelm, in response to the revolt, would send troops into England as the country soon after breaks out into civil war. And France, seeing this as their last chance to defeat the Germans, might end up joining the war, sparking an alternate version of World War I. Just as in our own timeline, this war would turn into a brutal conflict as Germany wages war in England, France, and Russia. The fronts in France and Russia would remain largely unchanged as Germany crushes the Russian army and still invades France through Belgium, though likely seeing much lower casualties on both sides of the Western Front as fewer troops would be placed there. However, one of the deciding factors in this alternate version of the war would be Germany's naval supremacy. With Britain in complete disarray and the Germans having control over the government, the Royal Navy wouldn't be able to dominate the seas like they did in our own timeline. So, without the Royal Navy causing trouble, Germany manages to hold naval supremacy, never facing blockade, keeping them much more capable throughout the war. As a result, Germany would extensively use its naval might in its fight in England, likely landing troops into East Anglia, taking control over the region as Germany pushes out into the rest of England. It wouldn't be an easy fight though, as the war likely turns into brutal trench warfare between the British rebels and German forces. And so, in order to break the stalemate, Germany would begin to seek new partners. In Ireland, this war would pose an opportunity for those seeking independence. And for Germany, Irish support would be of great strategic value in their fight against the Allies. So, the two would likely create an agreement with Germany promising independence to Ireland in exchange for their support in the war. With Irish support, the Germans would be able to bombard Western Britain, causing even more strain on the rebels. And with Germany's naval might, they would be able to blockade the Allies and cut the French off from exits to the Mediterranean, which would eventually starve them out. As the war goes on, and Germany, with their naval supremacy, doesn't resort to unrestricted submarine warfare, which would likely keep the US out of the war, the Allies would eventually be whittled down to the point that they would collapse from the pressure of the German military. Russia would still face revolution, France would likely see revolt as well, and Britain would likely see divides between royalists and republicans as the country once again falls under Wilhelm's control. And so, with the Allies collapsing, Germany manages to crush them, asserting its dominance over Europe. Apart from what Germany would do to the rest of Europe, the end of the war would have interesting consequences on Britain. Ireland would be given full independence, becoming close partners with Germany in Wilhelm's England. Meanwhile, Wilhelm, as a German first, would likely seek to punish the British for their revolt, giving major colonial concessions to Germany and Africa, realizing the Middle Africa Plan in its entirety, and essentially turn Britain itself into a German colony, gutting Britain from the inside out. However, once again, as a German first, Wilhelm would still likely abdicate the throne of England, handing it off to one of his sons as he attends to matters in Germany. But, despite this, the German rulers in Britain would likely still heavily attempt to Germanize Britain, as the liberal British population grows even more resentful towards them. So, as Germany takes complete control over Europe, Wilhelm II finds himself as master of a new world, with tensions in Britain once again on the rise. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure to stick around for more. And hey, you could also, maybe, subscribe or something. So that's it for today's video. Well, till next time, see ya.